how to make the isolation gown out of a twin sheet. You take your twin sheet and you fold it in half, the narrow side to the narrow side, so that's you're going to have the longest part. Lay it out. Need lots of room to smooth it out real good so there's no wrinkles in it. It's going to have a little excess on the side, so if it's not quite in half, it's okay. So then you take your pattern, the long piece of pattern that I gave you, and you place the one side on the fold just below the hem of the sheet. We'll be cutting that off. Then we just cut this part. Helps to have nice sharp scissors like these. And don't cut all the way down because we'll be using this full length here. So just cut as far down as the paper goes and then cut across. And then cut off your hem at the top. Okay. Next thing you do is you'll take this piece that you just cut, open it back up, and fold it the opposite direction. Even on, make sure these side pieces here are even. And then you take the folded edge and you bring it over and meet it to the other side. Again, make sure it's very even. Lay it out flat. You can even it up better that way. Get all your wrinkles out so you know it's flat. Then you're going to take that little half circle piece that I showed you, I cut for you. It looks like this. It'll be bent in half like this. There'll be a little notch right here. And on this side where the one fold is on the opposite side, lifting up the piece that is not folded, lift it forward. And that piece that's folded right there, you're going to take this, you're going to put this straight edge against the fold and this notch against the edge of the fabric. So it's going to be just like this. And you can either just cut it or mark it. I like to mark it. And you just cut those two pieces through those two pieces of the sheet. That's going to be your neck hole. Then you can lay this back over so that it's even. And we're going to cut the slits for the armholes. And to do that, it's going to be on this opposite end, this opposite side, where these folds are here. You're going to measure down Measure down 11 inches. Make a mark right on the fold. Then you're going to measure in 1 inch. Make a mark. And you're going to connect these two lines. Now, cutting through all 4 pieces of the sheet, you're going to cut this little wedge out. This is going to be where you're going to inset your sleeves. Now you're done with that piece. Now take your extra piece that you didn't use yet. And some sheets you may not have enough for this part and some you will. We can use extra fabric from something else and put opposite colored sleeves in it. Doesn't really matter. And with the sheet just folded in half like original. Lay it back out flat. Leave those tails because we're going to use them for something else in a minute. Make sure there's no wrinkles under there. Some sheets are easier to work with than others. This one's kind of slippery. Then you're going to take your sleeve pattern, which looks like this piece, like a big wedge. Doesn't matter which direction you put it on. Just make sure that it covers the entire thing. And I like to just draw around it because it's just easier to cut that way. So I just take a marker. It's not going to show because it's going to be in your seam. I take a marker and mark all the way around this. It's okay if it's a little bit not on the line. It's not going to make that much difference in the, just as straight as you can. It's just, I think, easier to cut using these lines instead. And then save this big long piece because we're going to use it for binding. There you have your sleeves. Now those big long pieces, you can take that and cut that into, I fold it up a couple times. If you have a rotary cutter, it's easier to do it when you fold it up several times. But what you're going to do is you're going to be cutting this into 1-inch strips. 1-inch strips, the lengthwise way. And then when you get the 1-inch strips cut, we'll be folding those in half to make the ties and the binding. And here I am. I'm sorry, my head's cut off. All right, I'm going to show you how to do the ties and the binding around the neck. That really long piece that we had left over after we cut all the other pieces, you're going to cut that into 2.5-inch strips. Whether you rotary cut it or use scissors, just approximately 2.5 inches. Then we're going to need really long strips because the belt needs to be at least 90 inches long and the neck piece is 55 inches long. So I usually take 2 of the pieces I cut and I connect them. I just sew straight across 2 pieces on the end. Then I lay it flat with the seam pointing toward this part of my machine. And I run a second parallel seam right down next to the first one. So it's going to look like that. That makes it stronger and it won't fall apart. And then you can trim off the excess. So there's not so much bulk in there when we actually make the tube. Cut off all my little strings. All right. So in order to make the tube, we're going to fold this in half, right sides to right side, so that seam's going to be on the outside now. I'm going to show you how to make the tube on a short strip so I don't have to take so long. So when you fold it in half, you're going to find a piece of cord or a piece of yarn, something really long and strong, and you're going to take the cord and you're going to place it in that fold, just like that. Then you're going to run the sewing machine right across the edge to secure that yarn or string, whatever you use, shoestring, it doesn't matter, right across the edge, so you're going to secure that in place. Now you're going to take that cord all the way along the length of this piece of fabric here that we're going to fold in half, and you're going to slide it over to the fold in the middle. And you're going to place that right on the left-hand side of your foot. So it'll always push it to the side, and you won't sew over top of it. And then you're going to have about 1/4 inch on the other side of the seam. So you're just going to sew straight down. Sew this tube closed, keeping that cord and that fold away from your needle. When you get to the end, make sure that cord stays over in that fold and just sew right off the end, finishing up your tube. Now you see the cord is loose in there. So next thing you're going to do is you go back to the other end and finding a chopstick, or I use a chopstick, they're really handy, or a pencil, something like that. You're going to try to work where you closed it off. We're going to try to work that down in this tube just a tiny bit to get it started. And I usually just kind of poke it down in there with my finger, and then I take something like a pencil or a chopstick in this case, and you just keep pushing it till you can feel that it's going down in. See, it's pushing it down in. Then you go back and you take this cord and you start pulling this cord, and it'll start bunching up on you. And it'll just pull right off the end. And it turns your tube right side out really quick. So then you just cut off the end of the piece here, so you have your cord for your next tube that you're going to make. Then you take your tube to your iron and iron it flat. Just kind of roll this. See where you made the seam? You're just going to try to kind of roll that like this with your fingers, and then just iron it flat. And this is going to be used for the binding around the neck and the ties around the neck, and also for the belt around the waist. Okay, now we're going to work on the gown itself. The first thing I'm going to start with is the sleeve. That's that wedge-shaped piece. Okay, with the sleeve, go to the narrow end, and that's going to be your cuff or your wrist. So we're going to turn this under 1/4 inch, and we're just going to give it a little 1/4 inch hem there. So if you want to pin it, that's fine. If you don't want to pin it, however is easiest for you to use it. So we're going to turn it under 1/4 inch and give it a little hem right along that edge. Okay, now we're going to turn it under 1/4 inch again, and that's going to hide that fraying edge. It'll hide it inside so it won't fray when it's washed. So turn it under another 1/4 inch and just sew right down there again, finishing up that hemming. You'll do that on both sleeves. Go ahead and trim off my threads. Now we're going to take and put these right sides together, and I do pin here. Right sides together and those open ends. I'm going to pin this to keep it from slipping around on me. Don't have to pin it very far, just 5 or 6 inches, 4 or 5 inches. Then you're going to take a ruler and you're going to measure up from the bottom of that hem. You're going to measure up about 1 inch and make a mark right on this right. Measure up about 1 inch from the end and just make a little mark right out here. It's going to be in your seam. Then from that mark, you're going to measure again, and you're going to measure about 2 inches. And you're going to make another little mark. That's where you're you're making the thumb hole for the thumb to go through. So just above that second mark, maybe about an inch up, you're going to put it under your machine and you're going to sew from just about an inch above that mark down to that mark, and then you're going to stop. Quarter of an inch. I usually take a couple back stitches just so that it locks it in place. Sew down to that mark, back up a few stitches, then come forward a few stitches. That gives it a really good tight lock there, so when they're putting the thumb in and out, it won't break open. Now, right here, between these two dots, we're going to take those and we're going to fold it. One part of it, we're going to fold it a quarter of an inch. Then we're just going to tack that in place, like you did the hem, a quarter of an inch. All the way down and off the end of your fabric. Then you're going to go to the other side and you're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to give it a quarter of an inch turn. On that end, you'll probably turn it around and start from the bottom, from the hem. Turn it under a quarter of an inch up to that mark where you sewed the other part to. Trim off your threads. All right, so now you have a little bit of a hem from that second mark you made all the way to the end. You see it's hemmed under. It kind of makes a nice, neat looking part here, and it's not going to keep fraying it. So then you'll put these back together and pin them in place, matching up those hems down there. And then you're going to, starting at the hem end, you're going to sew up. You're going to start sewing. You're going to back tack over here to make a good strong lock. Then you're going to sew up about an inch and do back stitch again to lock it in place. Trim off all your little threads because you'll have lots of them. It's just easier to trim them off as you go because you'll never find them when you finish the project and try to find all of the little loose threads. I just trim them as I go. Neaten it all up. All right. Then you'll see once that sleeve is turned right side out, it's good and locked in place here so it won't rip apart. It's locked right here so when they put their thumb, and right here so when they put their thumb in and out of this hole, it won't tear off. Okay? Do that on both sleeves. Then the next thing you do is you take the top part, the long side, and you turn it in half, right sides together. Find the midpoint. And I just take a little tiny snip. So it makes like a tiny little V right there in the midpoint. Or you can put a mark there if you want, but I just find it just as easy to put a little V in it right there. So then you're going to get your gown. Open it up. Find where you made those slits. You cut that wedge out to make the slits. That's where we're going to put the sleeve in. So you're going to take the sleeve that you just worked on, where that V is, and right sides to right sides. Make sure that you've turned it back out if you turned it in to see that was nice. Make sure that this is back outside. So then you're going to put it right side to right side. And down at the bottom where that slit is, at the little V down there, you're going to pin this V right there. That's your midpoint. And that's going to go right there at that bottom of that wedge that you cut out. And just pin it in place. Then going up this side, all the way up the top of that slit, you'll pin that in place to keep it nice and secure so it doesn't slip for you when you're making your seam. Just pin it in place. However many pins you need. Sometimes they don't quite match, but it's okay because we can trim that. It's not going to make that much of a difference in there. Then you do the same thing to the other side of the slit. All right, so then you're going to sew this seam 1/4 inch. Or 1/2 inch. If you're using a regular sewing machine, you probably should make it like 1/2 inch. I usually do 1/4 inch because I use a serger. But if you're going to use a regular sewing machine, you're going to need the extra room. So just make it a 1/2 inch seam. When you get down close to that V, it gets kind of bunched up underneath. So you just kind of have to keep smoothing it out and get around the V as well as you can. Sometimes there'll be a couple little pleats in there, but it's not going to make a difference because that's going to be your underarm and nobody's going to even know it. So you go around there, go around the V, continue down the other side. See where this V was? You'll want to go back and check and make sure that you got that in the seam, because sometimes it can slide off a little bit. But you can see I get a little puckering in there, but it's not going to be a big deal. But you do need to check to make sure that the bottom piece didn't slide back and you didn't catch it at all. So once you got that done, then you can open up your gown. And that seam that you just sewed, front sides together, you're gonna match the two sides together. Give it a good pin up here where the seams meet. This is going to be your shoulder now. So, and sometimes they don't quite, they're not even. They have a little extra, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. And this is going to be the top of your arm. So then you're going to sew from here all the way to here. And then this is going to be your shoulder. So you're going to sew across there and see, like here it didn't quite even out. So what I usually do is I come up here, you're 1/2 inch up here, you're doing a 1/2 inch seam, you're coming up the sleeve, and you get to this corner and you see that there's this extra up here. I just sort of merge it into, so that by the time you're over here, you're at that 1/2 inch, and then you just trim that off. It's not going to make that big a difference. Then you sew all the way down to the end here. And see, this is where your neck is. So that's why it doesn't go all the way across. This is where your binding's going to go, and you're going to put the ties on. So you're going to have this little flap, and it looks wrong, but it's right. So I usually start at the bottom of my sleeve where I made that thumb hole. And you may want to pin the whole thing because it will get slippery. I'm not a pinner. So you start down there right where you left off before, at the beginning of that thumb hole. Do a couple back stitches. Do a 1/2 inch seam all the way up that arm. You get close to that shoulder area where that seam meets. You're going to notice that it's not quite meeting, so I'm just going to come up, ease that in as best I can. Try to keep those seams together as much as possible. When you get close to that seam and you notice that when you pull the other 2 pieces over, the rest of the shoulder and the front of the gown, you'll notice that there's sometimes a lot over on this side. So I just kind of graduate over on this seam here till I meet up with this one over here. So I'm back to a 1/2 inch seam. Go till you get to that rounded neck part, and then you do a couple back stitches there to tag it in place. See, this is what I'm talking about, where you're coming up here, your 1/2 inch seam, and you get to this crossing of these seams, and there's all this extra fabric here. I don't know what they did to their pattern, but so I just kind of graduate it until I get over here, and I'm back to a 1/2 inch seam. Then that's your shoulder. And you're done with that one sleeve. Then you can turn that sleeve right side out. See if you did it correctly. It should look like a normal shoulder. And you can go and trim that off. Okay, in the last video, we put the sleeves in and we sewed the shoulder seams up. Next thing we need to do is we need to finish around the edge of the gown. Down the 2 long sides, across the bottom, back up the other side to the neck. So what you're going to do to finish that off is you're going to just take the gown wrong side toward you, and you're going to fold it under a 1/4 inch. Then you'll fold it under a 1/4 inch again. Then you'll just sew it. I usually do is I just try to turn it under 1/4 inch, turn it under 1/4 inch again, kind of pull it forward. Then you just start sewing. Go a little ways, then reposition your fabric. Turn it under that 1/4 inch, turn it under 1/4 inch again. Give it a little tug and it'll just kind of lay flat for you. Sew it all the way down. Turn it under 1/4 inch, turn it under 1/4 inch again. All the way down the side. Turn it under 1/4 inch, wrap it under 1/4 inch again. Give it a little tug. And just kind of smooths it out. As you get down to the bottom, 1/4 inch, 1/4 inch again. Just sew all the way off the end. And cut your thread there. Then you're going to turn your fabric around. You're going to start across the bottom. Do the same thing. You're going to turn it under 1/4 inch. Turn it over 1/4 inch again. Get your needle down in there so it can act as another hand. Then you can turn it under a 1/4 inch, second 1/4 inch, give it a little tug, and it'll just lay flat there for you. Just do that all the way across the bottom. This is the most time-consuming part, I think, because there's so much circumference around this gown. All right, I'm going to finish this off camera. All right, during this installment, we're going to learn how to put the binding around the neck and make the ties for the back of the gown. First thing you're going to do is you're going to take your gown and you're going to put your shoulder seams together and then pull the front of the gown out so you can find the center point of the gown. Then put a pin there so you can find it again in a minute. Then you're going to take your 55-inch length of that tube that you made earlier. You're going to take it first off. You're going to make sure it's 55 inches long. Cut it to that length. Then you're going to take it, and it's this wide. You're going to fold it in half, and you're going to iron it. Then you'll have a crease down the middle that you can follow. So once it's ironed, you're going to fold it in half also. Find the middle point on it, and then you're going to match that middle point up with the middle point of the gown front. Then to put it on the gown, we're going to take the gown front here, and we're going to place it right up against that fold line and pull this down over and place a pin to keep it secure. I've already done this half. See, it'll be pinned on like that, and you'll have a piece hanging off the end. You'll do it all the way across the end. Just take your gown edge of the neck and put it all the way up to that fold. Fold the fabric over. Put a pin in it. Do that all along this edge. All the way to the end. Might want to be sure and put a pin right there where the shoulder seam is to keep it in place, because it wants to slip out sometimes. Again, here we go, all the way to the end. This is what it's going to look like. You're going to have the edge of your neck. It's going to be tucked up inside that little piece of seam binding. And then you'll have these long pieces off the end that's going to be the ties. So in order to finish sewing this, we're going to zigzag this. So we're going to start on one end, placing all your fabric over on this side. So what it's going to look like is the open end is going to be that way toward, and then the fold side is going to be toward the back of your machine here. So just choose a zigzag stitch that is almost the width of the piece of fabric here, and not too terribly wide apart, but not real tight either. And you just zigzag down that piece, put those together. Going to hold that tie together, and when you get up here, kind of keep your fabric out this way and flat. Come up on here. We're just going to sew right over, going to continue zigzagging in that binding. And it will catch it in the back, and it'll catch that fabric that's inside and keep it in there. And just zigzag all the way across. You have to reposition your fabric a lot so you don't get too many tucks and puckers in it. Pull your pins out so you don't break a needle. Take your time, go slow. Make sure that that neckline stays up in that folded fabric. A lot of fabric in these things. Especially when you get close to those shoulder seams. Make sure that that's staying up in there, but that the fabric's not too puckered or making big pleats up and under there. Just kind of smooth it out as best you can. Once you get over that seam, it'll flatten back out for you. Then you just zigzag right off. Let's see if I can move this out of the way so you can see better. All right, so you're going to just zigzag right off, and you're just going to keep going right down that long string that's bent in two, folded in two. You're just going to zigzag it all the way down. Do a little back tack. Lock it off. Trim it. Trim your... We didn't finish those edges, so the best thing to do is just tie a little knot in the edge of the fabric. That'll keep it from fraying when it's washed and worn. Just tie it real tight, like that, on both ends. Trim off your threads. Tie a knot in that end. Now go back and check your neckline. Make sure it caught it on both sides, which it should have, and that it's not slipping out somewhere. That's what it's going to look like on one side, and that's what it's going to look on the other side. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to have to lay this out flat on a table so that you can see where these shoulder things are. Usually there's a fold there. You can see the fold line from the sheet from when you folded it to cut it. That's pretty much your middle part. So you're going to measure down from the top of here. You're going to measure down 16 inches. Measure down 16 inches from the top of the neck down to the part down here. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to put the belt on the front of the gown. And you're going to lose my head in here in a minute because I have to move the camera down so you can see the table. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to put your gown out on a flat surface and smooth it out as much as possible. That front area between the shoulder seams. Smooth it out. And then you're going to find that midpoint again, which you probably will see a fold line that goes right down the middle of your gown because that's the fold where you cut the fabric on. And that should be your middle point. Then you're going to take a ruler or a measuring tape or something to measure with, and you're going to measure down on that middle point fold line from the top of the neckline. You're going to measure down 16 inches, and you're going to place a pin right there at that midpoint. Then you're going to get your other tube that you made that is 90 inches long. You're going to fold that. It's going to be flat. It's not going to be folded like we did on the neck. But we're going to fold that in half lengthwise so we can find the middle point of that. And I usually put a pin there too. Then you're going to match this pin with the other pin that's on the front of your gown. Right there. 16 inches down from the neck. You're going to pin that in place right there. All right. Then you're going to smooth it out. Make it go parallel with your neckline. And you're going to take another pin, and about 3 inches over from that middle pin that you put in to hold it there, you're going to put another pin about 3 inches over to the right. And another pin about 3 inches over to the left. So it's going to look like this when you get it pinned on. Then you're going to take this whole thing over to your machine, and we're going to sew this on. Okay, back to the machine. This is the hard part because it's so much fabric. You've got that pinned in there nice and flat. I think you can see it. Got to get all this fabric up underneath your machine, and you're going to, at that right pin, you're going to go right at the top of that strip of fabric, put your needle down, remove that pin, and you're going to sew straight across that 1.5 inch wide, however it is. You're going to sew right straight across to the bottom in a straight stitch. And then back up, give it a good tack at the top, all the way down to the bottom, give it a little tack there. Then you're going to, leaving your needle down, you're going to pivot the fabric so that now the belt is pointing straight at you. And you're going to come across all the way over to that second pin. The next pin down is the middle point. You're going to go to that far pin, right along the edge of there, as close to the edge as you can. Move that pin so you don't break your needle. Come on over to the next pin. Move that pin, leaving your needle down in your fabric. Raise your pressure foot, scooch all this fabric through the middle, get it nice and smooth again. You don't want to accidentally sew something under there you don't want under there. Take a couple little stitches, back stitch, forward, and go all the way to the other side again. Back stitch to the other side, go back to the edge. Again, leaving your needle down, raise your presser foot. Scooch all that fabric through. Then you're going to come right down across the top to where you had started. You get there, just do a couple back stitches, get it tacked in place. And that's the end of that part. Your belt is now secured to the front of the gown. Carefully remove all that fabric. Trim off your threads. And this is what it's going to look like. It's tacked down here. It's not going anywhere. That's going to be on the front of your gown. So when you put the gown on, you're putting the gown on this way. You're putting the arms in the armholes. Arms in the sleeves. You have your hole for your thumb. This will go up around your neck. And you have those ties on it tied around your neck. Then your belt here is going to go around your waist, and it'll go wrap around the back. And for people like me, it's going to get tied in the back. But thin people, they'll wrap it around and tie it in the front because these are really, really long. And there you have it. Your gown is done.